Okay, it's 12, so why don't we kick off our lunch? Welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us once again for what is going to be a fantastic little lunch session today with an incredible guest who I think most of us will not have met before, and such an opportunity to delve into a really incredible practice that has so much to offer us. Can I begin by making some acknowledgements? I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are all meeting in our varied locations, and pay respects to elders past, present and emerging. I want to acknowledge that sovereignty has not been ceded. I also want to acknowledge today the deep suffering, the sadness and anger that is being expressed by individuals and communities the world over, and also here in Australia, about the ongoing oppression and marginalisation of First Nations people and people of colour. And I think, in this forum, I want to acknowledge, and I hope that you will join me in this acknowledgement of the struggle to end the brutalising impact of systemic racism, and also the power of the arts to lend its voice to solidarity, not as symbolism, but as acts of solidarity that are visible, palpable to these communities that we are wanting to support in this moment. Acts of solidarity that allow for accountability and that lead to change. So on that note, I want to thank our hosts, Arts Front, whose commitment to these conversations is really unparalleled in the arts, and I want to acknowledge them as well today for what they're, the space that they create for conversations that are led by creatives of colour and First Nations creatives. We have again captioning and Auslan interpreting available for those who require it. So you need to pin Susan today if indeed you're using the Auslan interpreting, and or access the captioning. Please all introduce yourselves in the chat function, telling us where you are in terms of the land that you come from, the Indigenous land that you are currently on. And I'm going to hand over to Priya Srinivasan to do an introduction of our special guest today. And we're also joined by Pilar Kasat from Perth, WA, in a conversation that I think is going to be extremely stimulating. And I think this is going to be one of those sessions that we won't want to end. But again, I want to encourage you all to think of this as the first conversation, the beginning conversation of a really ongoing dialogue that we're very keen to have, not just here in Australia, but across the world, that unites us in solidarity. So handing over to you, Priya, and I look forward to the session today.
Thanks, Veronica. I'd also like to second everything that you've said. I don't want to take up more time, but I truly feel whatever you have stated today is something we all need to stand by. And I currently live and work on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I also pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. I also, as always, acknowledge the gods, goddesses, and spirits and elders from my culture who are here with me. And I acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded and we exist on stolen land. Pilar, I'd like to hand it over to you to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Veronica. I'm Priya, and welcome, Minerva. I know that you'll introduce you in a minute, but it's really exciting to have you with us. I live on the Whadjuk nation of the Noongar people in the west, southwest of Western Australia. And I'm originally from Chile, and I also I echo both of your words in terms of our solidarity with our brothers and sisters who are actually suffering at this time. Yeah, it's great to be here, and I've got a bit of a history on community cultural development for a long time in this country. I've been here for 30 years, and now I'm doing a PhD to really trying to deepen my understanding and put some theoretical, framing into the work that I've done for so many years. So I'm deep in thinking for the last few years. That's me.
Thank you, Pilar. Really appreciate that and happy to have you here. I want to introduce our guest today, Minerva Tapia, who's here from California. She is literally perched on the border between San Diego and Tijuana. Normally, she moves between San Diego and Tijuana, but obviously with the closed borders now, she's been COVID isolating in San Diego. I wanted to acknowledge that Minerva is an exceptional artist, thinker, and scholar who I had the privilege to meet more than a decade ago in California at the University of California, Riverside, when she was doing her PhD in critical dance studies. And I remember I was a professor at the time, and I remember thinking, what is this woman doing getting a PhD? She already knows everything she needs to know, and she's so brilliant and really making work that is so deeply critical and is speaking to the conditions around her. One of the things that I always remember after all these years about Minerva is a piece that she shared with the class for one of her projects about her work on the women of Juarez in Mexico. And I don't know how many of our viewers today will actually know about the history of Juarez. It's a very significant space for us to all know about the nexus of how gender violence, state violence, and patriarchy and capitalism all sort of come together in an intersectional way. And Minerva's work was so striking and moving that I've never forgotten it. So I really want us all to sort of look at some of these questions she's asking. And I'm just going to read her bio briefly, but there's so much more to know about her. And there's lots of things on the Arts Front website and Minerva's website, and where you can also connect with her in the future. Needless to say, Minerva is an exemplary Mexican-American choreographer, educator, and company director of the Minerva Tapia Dance Group. She holds a PhD in critical dance studies from the University of California, Riverside, and has an MFA in dance at UC Irvine. And she also has received her BA from Tijuana, Mexico. And her work has been presented in spaces like the Joyce Soho in New York, in dance festivals in Panama, Costa Rica, Argentina, Spain, Brazil, Turkey, and Cuba, where she also performed and studied for several years. Her research interests focus on border dance culture, specifically the production of a contemporary dance at the US-Mexico border. And her written essays and her critical essays have appeared in numerous critical journals and books across the field. And currently, she's the director of the Municipal Institute of Art and Culture in Tijuana. Minerva, I would love for you to talk a little bit about your work and where you see yourself situated now in terms of everything that's going on. But perhaps before you speak, we could actually share with everyone about a minute or so of your artistic work to share so people get a visual of what it is that you've been working on. Thanks so much. Minerva, please feel free to speak a little bit about your work and also what we just saw. It would be great. Thank you.
First of all, I would like to say thank you for the invitation. And well, I see myself as a regular border crosser. I grew up in the Tijuana, San Diego region. And since I was a child, I grew up seeing this huge wall, a wall that had many faces, many sizes, many colors. Currently, it doesn't look like at today at the video you just saw. As a regular border crosser, I study the border by crossing the border regularly, daily, sometimes twice a day. Is many years ago, it was an inspiration to create choreographies that talk about women who are related to the border, about cases that I see that people could not cross the border, that the same border that I was watching every day, it was very different for many people that were close to me. Some people can cross the border daily. Some people die in trying to cross the border. That's a huge impact for many border citizens. Even though they are familiar with the border, still sometimes it feels like it's something new. Because, for example, when you cross the border, they will always ask you what you bring, and you feel very normal to say and familiar with the questions, nothing to declare. But there are days that certain things happen in the border. Maybe the border collapsed because they were constructing the border, they were making it bigger, and it collapsed, and then your whole day goes upset about these things that you see in the border, and that doesn't make you see it so familiar. That the different experiences that we deal with crossing the border, it doesn't make you feel comfortable, even though you are so familiar. You never rest. You always are in the moving, in feelings, and being aware that you don't know what is going to happen. But as soon as you cross it, it's like a regular border crosser has something like amnesia, like an instant amnesia, like they cross and everything is fine, and you leave it there. Is maybe we develop that way of feeling to protect ourselves, not to get mad or angry, or not to get sad. I've been choreographing pieces with dancers from both sides of the border. So most of our rehearsals are done in Tijuana, but many times I have choreographed by using the technology. The border is not the same as I mentioned before. Not even for me. It was not the same border 10 years ago than the one is today. I have growing up looking at this wall, thinking that I had to do something about it from the perspective of as a choreographer. Mm. So I started, the first choreographies were more about what I was seeing. Later, when I started the PhD, I started to include more questions, critical questions. But I also think that people who doesn't study, sometimes the border makes them critical. I believe that borders makes you being critical. For example, now with the COVID-19, we had a previous experience with in Tijuana, people were wearing masks, and as soon as they walk a few meters, they just take the mask off, and it was a different experience. The same sky, the same weather, but in a matter of seconds, you are in another environment, emotionally, and also in the things that you do. So most of my choreographies they talk about the women who stay in Mexico when the men cross the border to find jobs. That was in the 1990s. And then I started to do choreographies that are called Danza Indocumentada, Undocumented Dance, Illegal Border. And that I did it when I was studying in UC Irvine with dancers who had experience with borders. They were from many countries, and they were living near a border. And so I think the making dances that talks about the border is the way I try to understand, and also try, at least from the dance part, to talk about these issues that are so difficult for many to talk about it. Even now, when I'm talking to everybody here, I feel a little anxious and to talk about something that I've been talking through dance for so many years.
Thank you. I know it's not easy with the work you've been doing, and what you see in front of you is in some ways very different to the fact that we don't see physical walls, and the walls that you come across are different to the walls we see in our lives. And this is something Pilar was mentioning before, how Australian walls and borders are so different. And Pilar, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, thanks, Minerva. I think here in Australia, we've got a little awareness, really, of this concept of border, especially between the border between Mexico and the United States. That physical border is not something that we experience because we are an island nation. However, interestingly, I think as a country, we've got this paranoia of boats with brown bodies descending on us. This is where then the notion of border really comes alive. And just to contextualize that a little bit, so for us, the idea of border culture that you talk about, it's probably not so clear, and I'd love you to talk to that in a minute. But if I can just say that in Australia, between the 70s and now, we've had boat arrivals from time to time, and the peak of those boats arrivals was in 2014 when we had about 20,000 people. Now, that was such a political uproar that it really shifted an election here. But in comparison, in contrast, about 60,000 people every year overstay their visas that come by plane. White bodies overstay their visas, and that's not a problem. But brown people coming on boats is a real problem. So yeah, I just like if you maybe comment on this idea of border culture, and you talk about your work in that space. As I said, for us, I think in our imagination, this is take the shape of boats and people arriving on our shores, which is quite different.
The Tijuana San Diego region, even though it was divided in the year 1884, and people are so used to see this wall and cross it, it is interesting that even though it is there, that everybody kind kind of know the border around this area. The city of San Diego doesn't see themselves as border residents or a city that is a border city. Tijuana, in the contrary, is very difficult to isolate or think that they are not a border city. I think that, for example, yes, I would like to mention that the border is open right now, but it is open only to American citizens. We have in Rosarito many families who are seniors, American seniors, who live there because it's a beautiful place to live, and also is less expensive than San Diego. So we have many American white families who live near Tijuana in Rosarito. The reasons people cross this border are many, and most of the people think it's for tourism, but it's for many other reasons. For example, we have in Tijuana many it's not, you call it, where people do the same job over and over. The movement is a maquiladora. How you call a maquiladora?
Yeah, factory workers maybe?
A factory, yes. So we have many American factories in Tijuana, and that's one of the reasons the border is not totally closed.
Sorry, Minerva, do you have a sense of the numbers, like just to give us a context? What are we talking when people movement in those borders? Like, do you get a sense of what, like, will there be thousands of people, right? Like
thousands. Is it? I don't remember the number exactly, and especially during this week. But I know for sure that is the border that has more crosses.
Mm-hmm.
And now many students from Tijuana study in San Diego. So we have many students who cross the border. We have tourism, reasons to do. Now they cannot cross for tourism. The only reason you can cross is one, if you have, if you're an American citizen, and if you have a good reason to cross the border. So to cross the border, there are also many privileges in crossing the border. You have the regular lines that it takes hours to cross the border, and you have sentry and another category on crossing the border, who you cross faster. For that you pay, and usually they do a study in your case if you are a person who deserves to have this permission to cross the border. So as I said, San Diego doesn't see the city as a border region, it's a border city. And Tijuana cannot, even though there are many people who doesn't cross the border in Tijuana, there was a moment in their lives that maybe they wanted to cross and they couldn't, and they stay there. We have many people from Haiti, thousands of people from Haiti. We have from El Salvador, from many central countries, from the south of Mexico. And Tijuana is a very eclectic city in terms of religion and in terms of culture, aesthetics in dance. And dance is one of the arts that has more collaboration between Tijuana and San Diego. There are many dancers who, when they finish a BA at UCSD, they even went to leave to Tijuana to join a company of contemporary dance.
So, Minerva, sorry to interrupt for 1 second. What you're pointing to here about how you're able to create art despite the wall, despite the border being partially closed or the border being closed to certain people. Just wondering if you can speak to how you and your collaborators have been able to create work with all the challenges and obstacles the borders present. And this is something the people from Feral Arts are also asking. In a way, this is the kind of knowledge we all may need in the future if and when borders continue to be closed like they are now. How do we navigate, pathways? So if you could just speak to that, and heads up that we only have 4 minutes left. I told you to go very quick. We have lots more to say, but if you can just speak to that a little bit.
Well, the first thing is the passion to do the things that you want to do. When you want to do collaborations, you find the ways. In the 1990s, there was more collaborations than now. And for a moment, we thought that all these long lines at the border will stop the collaborations, but it didn't. We even, now, of course, that everybody's online, we still have rehearsals online, and we are making projects for the future. So I think it's basically because we all want to talk about how difficult it is to live with a border, and we want to express in different ways how to deal with a border region, that dancers, choreographers still want to collaborate. So I think it's the first movement to start doing something is that you decide that you want to do it, and the ways of doing it and the forms, it will change with time. Depends when you can cross or not cross. You always find the way to collaborate.
Thank you. Veronica, would you like to say anything? We have about 2.5 more minutes.
I've got so much I want to say, but I don't want to open up on a new topic of conversation. I just want to say to Minerva that I'm really interested at some other point in time to have you back, particularly to talk about who funds this work. And I'm really interested in whether you're generating the resources to make this work yourself, because I gather that the work in itself covers some pretty challenging terrain. And I'd really love to know at another time if we could please have you back just to talk about, how do you make this work with institutional support, with state support, or on your own? Maybe give us a brief answer, but can we really delve into that some other time?
Yes, definitely there are institutions who can support you on both sides of the border, but also we do it with no funds. We do it with funds, and we do it mixing, and it's I think that I can give you more names, but I know we don't have time. But there is institutions who can support you when you submit a project that is binational.
Well, Pilar, any last thoughts?
Yes, thanks, Minerva. That's so interesting. And I just want to say the point that I made before was perhaps to highlight also that the borders are places where death occurs, and we know how many people die in the Sonora Desert in trying to cross borders. So I guess the work it's really talking about life and death on the borders, as well as the complexities and the richness and all of that. But people do die in these places. Yeah.
Yes, one of my choreographers talks about las mujeres de Juárez, the women from Juárez, and in document illegal border. I talk about one person that I talked before. That person wanted to cross the border, and it is so crazy to think that one paper has so much power. If I have this paper that it looks this size and I can cross, when others lose their
Yes.
lives, and
Yes.
and that's something that is going on, and is going on along the whole US Mexican
Yes. Yes.
border. And let's talk about another thing is the reasons is drug dealing, and there are so many guns, and it's so many things that are involved in why is so tragic, these things
Yes.
that happen at the border. And I
Yes.
think it's a problem that it has to be addressed and in art or in laws by both sides of the border.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Minerva, as always, it's such a pleasure and so stimulating to speak with you, and so inspiring to hear about the continued work you're doing. And I think for Australian artists, it's more important than ever to hear your voice in terms of how you're looking at the border, at its intersection with gender and the state. And so many questions that you're asking are so relevant to us. And particularly, I wanted to say, I hope we can connect you to Ozdance at some point, and the Australian dance networks. I think it'd be really important for them to hear how you're actually making contemporary dance that is literally speaking to the physical and the political situation you're in. And it can be very useful, and I think really leading the way as we are trying to reimagine what our future should look like post-COVID. Your thoughts and your experience, I think, would be really important to bring into the conversation here. So thank you. Thanks for coming. And as always, thanks to Feral Arts and Arts Front and the team, the interpreters, and everyone who has always supported, as Veronica has said in the beginning of this session, the giving a voice to those who normally don't have voices to speak, and to really bring diversity questions to the table on many levels. So thank you, as always. Thanks so much.
Thank you.